Hi everyone, welcome to my review of The Pink Panther in 1963. Of course directed by Blake Edwards, and the first in the Pink Panther films. Of course, big franchise, and of course, yes, I've been saying maybe a couple of comments here and there that, I wanted to kind of rewatch the main, Peter Sellers ones, kind of for sure, and review them on the channel at some point. And of course, tonight is the night where, basically I've rewatched it, of course. And yes, I think I might review the trail of the Pink Panther, but mainly the early ones, the ones with Peter Sellers in them, that I'll definitely be reviewing. I won't be going for the kind of reboot kind of films and the new ones. I have no intention of ever watching them. To me, it is Peter Sellers, who really, I'm not going to watch any of the other ones at all. And yes, basically, this film, I've seen most of the original ones as a kid, especially Strikes Again. I absolutely loved that film, and actually, I've not seen it for quite a few years now, probably about 7 years. Actually, really looking back on it, and yeah, I think hearing that it's not at times not that well respected and stuff, and not that much loved, but it's still solid ratings and everything. Actually, in some regards, better than this in terms of ratings. But yeah, I thought, well, that's quite interesting. We'll see. If I still love the film as much as I did as a kid. I found that hilarious. And for me, I think actually generally I did prefer, kind of how it was more, energetic and kind of more bumbling. The accent, of course, was done even further, and just the mannerisms, of course. He took it to the extreme in that, especially, and yeah, of course, Kato and everyone there, and Dreyfus. Of course, this one is the original, and it doesn't have any of them characters in it and stuff. And I actually got confused, off memory, of a couple of scenes, kind of jumbled them up between this and A Shot in the Dark. And actually, rewatching this, A Shot in the Dark is one that I definitely preferred. And actually, I did really like that one. This is the one actually that, I didn't watch too much as a kid. I didn't love the film, yeah, basically, it is fairly acclaimed, and on rankings though, people put it in the top 3 at least. So yes, this film basically is about the Pink Panther is this particular diamond. Of course, you see a very very for me rushed, unfortunately, opening scene where they kind of introduce this, and the princess is younger, and she, of course, later on played by Claudia Cardinale. Of course, a brilliant actress. Many things. Once Upon a Time in the West, of course, as well. One of my absolute favourite films of all time. She gives a wonderful performance in that, and just of course she's in many films I've not seen yet, including Fellini films. I believe, and yes, brilliant actress. And she basically later on plays the princess grown up, and she has a pivotal role in the film. You've also, of course, got Inspector Clouseau himself, who certainly, in some of the Pink Panther films, and if you combine them, for me, he's one of the, regardless if none of the films themselves are masterpieces, or some of the very best films, not to say some of them aren't great, but I think really, regardless of that, I think he's one of the best characters, in cinema, certainly comedies. Peter Sellers, for me, is one of the legendary comic actors, as well. Dramatic roles that he plays. Lolita and Doctor Strangelove, he kind of course, does very, very different things to what he does in the Pink Panther films. And actually, yes, for me, the best Peter Sellers film is Doctor Strangelove. This is perfection. So I can't wait to review that. And yes, of course, he plays 3 different roles in that. He was known to be, very, very. The range basically of what he could do was staggering. It was almost unlimited kind of thing. And yes, in this, he's much more kind of restrained, but he is, of course, Inspector Clouseau, and yes, of course, he's still hilarious in this film. He's not quite as kind of, I wouldn't say over the top. Well, yes, but he kind of, because he's so good, was such a great actor. I think he controlled it perfectly in many of the films later on. But he's not as outgoing, as kind of exaggerated, you could say, as well as the. Not just the physicalness, but the accent and all this kind of stuff. Of course, the French accent was put on even more so, in the later ones. And in this one, it's a bit more subdued, a bit more kind of, you could say grounded. But yes, basically, he is absolutely brilliant in this film, even if he's not as good as or as enjoyable as he was in the kind of later on ones, even A Shot in the Dark, he was better. I think actually that's the one where it kind of changed as well, with all these different things. And yes, basically, you've got Sir Charles as well, who's basically played by David Niven, and he's kind of the Phantom, as well. Basically a thief, and yeah, he's basically after the Pink Panther, and of course, yes, basically, there's different characters, different kind of subplots that go on throughout the film. And Inspector Clouseau, of course, is on the case, kind of thing. And while this is all going on, you've got different kind of shifts in power and stuff, and people are, kind of double crossing each other. And you've also got the nephew of Sir Charles who's involved as well. And yes, basically, it's a couple of locations, and that's about it, really, for the film. But, at first, it kind of, for me, is a bit muddled, despite really, actually, for the main bulk of the film, only having a few locations. I think this film, for me, is not great, actually, and it's definitely the one I remember, yeah, definitely seeing it all, I kind of thought, yes, that's the one that I didn't, love, certainly, but I do think it's okay, I think it's decent. Unfortunately, it's not... it's not as good. I don't think it's one of the best comedies or anything. I think it's very, very flawed. It is unfortunately quite flat at times for me. And really, when Peter Sellers is not on the screen, this is the one that really doesn't work as well as it should. And I wanted to kind of like this more than I did. And I remember this is the one. Yeah, really, I didn't really take to as much. I still liked it, and I certainly liked sequences, and they're all the bits I remembered really as well, and the bits I don't remember or put to this film, I think there's a reason why, really for me. And yes, basically, it all unfolds from there, and it's a comedy, of course, a mystery. There's some great slapstick in the film, and there is some really good writing in the film, and just some really hilarious moments, some sequences that are really, really so well put together, and so well judged. But then a lot of the film, unfortunately, especially when Peter Sellers is not on screen, it is flat for me. It doesn't really work that well for the comedy. It's not awful, and it is just. It's not that engaging. You've got a lot of bland characters, a lot of ones that just aren't that interesting. I think Sir Charles was good, but unfortunately, some of the stuff that David Niven was given was basically it was not that great. It seems like most of the stuff that does really, really work it is with Peter Sellers, and that's mainly, of course, because it is more slapstick or situations where the awkwardness of it and everything is so well conveyed by Peter Sellers that it kind of elevates that stuff as well. But that stuff, really, every scene Peter Sellers is in pretty much is stuff that I was laughing at. I was really enjoying, or at least enjoying, apart from maybe the kind of that song in the middle of the film, very weird. But yes, basically, the first 20 minutes, I thought this is too muddled. It's really all over the place. It's jump into different locations, and I get the kind of thing. It's obviously. Keep saying meanwhile, and yes, it's kind of a little bit funny in itself, but show me locations and characters that I'm not really interested in. The plot is not really, it's not really told with sophistication, and that would be fine if these moments, even without Peter Sellers, were actually really, really funny, or at least had some sort of characters that I kind of took to, or moments that kind of interested me, compelled me, and this film is well shot. It's not great editing, because that comes into, of course, the way the film flows and the way that kind of jumps around. And at times it's not that well directed. It's solid overall, I think, but it does have certainly the first 20 minutes is not really well directed for me, because it's just so muddled. You get an introduction, of course, to Clouseau, and that's really memorable. And then the globe bit, of course, hilarious. And then I was thinking, yes, this is it. It starts to pick up here, obviously. And then, of course, chops off after not even a minute, maybe, and it goes back to some other scenes. Claudia Cardinale, unfortunately, her character is not good in this film. I do not know what was happening with her character of the princess. It just really didn't come across well. I think David Niven, a good actor in this film, even, but really. he's given stuff that isn't that compelling. It's just really quite bizarre at times. The drunk scene, the tiger, I didn't like. I thought it was really, really stupid, unfortunately. And yes, basically, I loved almost, you could say, the stuff with Peter Sellers. That really, long sequence, 20 minutes or so sequence in the room where they keep going in and out, and of course, the other characters involved there, even David Niven's character, of Sir Charles. That was the best sequence in the film. That was sustained enough to kind of make me, as well, combined with the moments littered throughout with, of course, Peter Sellers, for me to like the film. I do like it. I don't think it's a great film, but that sequence was really, really impressive. It was engaging. It was really, really well put together. The suspense, the tension, the comedy, and just the way that all the characters kind of do have an involvement there. The main characters, and they actually are. They all have their kind of moments that actually I kind of liked them there. But then again, up until that point, I wasn't too invested really in other characters. And yes, of course, Clouseau and his wife are kind of staying in this place, this hotel. And yes, all the best stuff comes from that, within that room, the kind of sequences there. And, it's a sustained sequence just before the final act, which is a little bit of a dip. But again, the film doesn't really... I think the second hour of the film is pretty much consistently a like from me. So that's why, it kind of bumps it up. Some of the stuff in the first half, certainly the first 20 minutes, and that tiger scene, which goes on forever, I didn't like. I thought it was bizarre. Just really, really uncomfortable, awkward, just bad acting in a way at times, and just didn't work for me. I didn't really see the point in that scene, and there's a couple of bits early on as well where it really, just because some of the characters appear there, it seems like that they thought it was really essential for the film, but really that some of them points didn't work. The skiing stuff at the beginning as well, for me, it's actually not that well put together. And it could have been, but it wasn't. And yes, of course, the Pink Panther theme is amazing. It's one of the most iconic in film. It shows up a couple of times in this, not as much some of the others. But yes, basically, there's great music, of course. There's some, decent cinematography overall. It's nice to look at. The locations that they go to are very, pleasing to look at. But the editing, certainly in the first hour, does suffer. I think it's kind of, it's a bit all over the place. It's certainly early on, and just as well, I was a bit bored at times because it just wasn't that compelling. I think there wasn't loads of comedy coming. If Sellers wasn't on the screen, it was really stuff I didn't quite like. For the first hour. The stuff after that, really, Sellers is at least always involved, or it's just the stuff. It's moments or sequences that are just better for me, and kind of but the final act, it is a bit more over the top, and you can't see Sellers in true form because he's of course got the costume on and everything. But yes, and it is of course a bit kind of you could say drawn out, and not quite, doesn't quite have the zest of the previous 20-30 minutes or so of the film. There was that really great sequence, very good sequence. And yes, I think the ending is a bit depressing and kind of weird and bizarre. But yes, basically this film, it is an average film, a high average definitely, because there's so much greatness from Sellers. There is moments early on that I did like, for sure. And really the second half, I liked really all of it. There was also of course that sequence for 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so, a bit less than that I did think was so well put together. The writing, just the dramatic irony, and all this kind of stuff, and Sellers involved with the other characters, main characters of the film. Really, that's when it's at its best, of course. And just there's so many hilarious moments within the sequence, but the rest of the film, of course, does have its issues, and even then, Sellers really doesn't, it doesn't reach the kind of heights of what he would do in some of the other films. So overall, I think, as I said, it's an average film. It's not great for me personally, and that's fine, of course. Many people love this film. It's not, the most popular one. I think The Shot in the Dark probably is, but this one, it is very, very popular, and I liked it. I thought it was overall solid, but it did have many, many issues, including some acting, unfortunately, some just kind of directionless moments, and just stuff that for me didn't quite work, at times, really at all, and other times not as well as it should have done. And for me, without Sellers, this film would not have been a like from me, because he was so good in this film. He was great, and even then, he's not as good as really from a few of the other ones, at least. The Pink Panther films, he really does. He's just one of the best, comedy actors for me of all time, and of course, so many other films as well, including two Kubrick films. That he was so good in. Of course, Strangelove, three different characters he played, which is just amazing. And yes, this film, for me, gets a 68%. An average film. It's fine. It's not a dislike overall, because it has stuff I really did like in the film. Certainly that sequence. But really, and it has its charms. But really, it's not a film. That I really. There was moments where I definitely was bored, and it just didn't quite work for me. The other characters in the film, wasn't, most of them weren't really developed that well. They weren't very interesting. They were quite annoying at times, and just that as well. That scene with the tiger really set me off. It really affected the flow of the rest of the film for quite a while, until that that sequence, and then of course you've got the opening 20 minutes, which I didn't like. I thought it was very, very kind of bizarre. It's too globetrotting in a way. It was just going from different scene to scene, locations, and it wasn't really kind of grabbing me at first, actually. And the sequences I do remember from this that I did like are the ones that I still like. But the other ones as well that I thought were in this film actually in a shot in the dark. So yes, that is definitely the film. That I do prefer that too. Many people kind of say that they're pretty close. No way, this for me, Shot in the Dark, it's definitely better. And yes, Strikes Again is better as well for me. I think that was definitely a more effective comedy as well. But yes, this film, it's fine as average. And many people think it's great, and that's fine. For me, it's not great, but it is a film I liked. And Sellers is really the genius here. Without him, as I say, it probably wouldn't have been a like for me. And yes, a decent comedy that I would recommend. It's very interesting as well. This is kind of one of the first franchises that started really right next to Bond. It's really interesting, actually, and the similarities actually between the two. Doctor No, of course, a year before this, and the same year as this, was From Russia with Love, one of the best Bonds. And yes, it's just it's kind of interesting as well. It's one of the first franchises, and this film, for me, it's not Doctor No. That was such a great film, which you can see why it launched franchise. But really, this one, it's only decent for me, and it's nothing to speak of, nothing special, apart from elements like the acting from Sellers, the kind of iconic moments, and the theme. But really, for me, it's not great, and it's certainly not for me the best Pink Panther film. And yes, we'll be reviewing the rest, the Seller ones, and of course, yes, can't wait for that. Really can't wait to go through these. And yes, thanks for watching this review.